this computer. And okay, I'm just setting up the recording and we are ready to go. Hold on 1 second. Okay, record it here. Okay, Parshas Emor. Finally, I'm sorry for all of those technical difficulties. Firstly, the class is sponsored Le'ilui Nishmas, Chaim and Iri ben Avraham, Shavalias Hanashama, be a good to better for his whole family, and all of the Torah and inspiration should be able to Shemaima in his schus. Amen. Okay. Okay, thank you everybody for bearing with my complete ineptitude technically. And now we're back, ready to roll. So we're doing Parshas Emor, but like last week, I want to do something that's tangentially related to Parshas Emor, but more related to our Aveda during Sefira Omer. And last week we gave a class, because the whole idea, again, just to remind ourselves, the whole idea of Sefira Omer is that we are spending this time period, these 7 weeks, not just remotely and robotically counting the days and doing the mitzvah of Sefira every night, but the whole idea behind counting the days of Sefira Omer is we're meant to really refine ourselves and rectify ourselves during this time period. I mean, a whole year we're supposed to do this. A whole year we're supposed to work on ourselves and refine ourselves and make ourselves better people. But there are certain time periods that it's an auspicious time to do this. And we have assistance from above in doing that. And that is this time period that we find ourselves in now. As we left Pesach, the original Pesach, the original Yetzias Mitzrayim, we were on the lowest possible spiritual madrega. As it says, we were sunk into the Mem Tesh Shari Tuma, we were sunk into the 49 gates of impurity. Had we remained in Mitzrayim a moment longer, we would have been permanently stuck there, unable to be in a state, unable to refine ourselves, unable to ever come out. And so this is why didn't, I mean, Hashem made so many miracles for Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why didn't he take us immediately to Har Sinai? Take us on some kind of a magical carpet, magic carpet, and bring us right to Har Sinai. Because we weren't ready spiritually, emotionally, psychologically for Kabbalah Satorah. We had to go through 49 days, each day refining and rectifying a part of ourselves so that when we get to Kabbalah Satorah, we're vessels for it. We're ready to receive the Torah, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. And so that replays itself every single year. So every year during this time period, we're meant to go from being stuck into our sort of our spiritual or psychological confinements that we find ourselves in, that's Mitzrayim, and really refine ourselves, make ourselves better people. This is why the Omer, the korban for the Omer was brought the day after Pesach, and the sacrifice of the Omer was made of barley. And barley is specifically animal food, was used for animal food. And the sacrifice when we get to Shavuos is the shtei halechem, which is made of wheat, which was human food. And this is the idea that each one of us, and we learn this in Tanya as well, each one of us has sort of a dual consciousness. You know, we have our animalistic side, our animalistic consciousness, which is for most of us our default setting. And that's our ego, our egocentrism, our selfishness, our negative attributes. And then we have our godly side, our transcendent side that yearns for connection, for purpose, for transcendence, for meaning. And these two sides, these two souls within us are in a constant state of tension because only one of them can control the garments of thought, speech, and action. So when we left Mitzrayim, when we experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim, our animal souls were fully in control. Hence, the korban was the korban Omer, made of barley, made of animal food. Our goal is to make ourselves uniquely human, to get to the place where we're no longer when what is uniquely human about us, that's our godly soul. That's our capacity to transcend our nature. Animals have no capacity to transcend their nature, right? The lion can't decide to be a vegan. Can't decide, you know what, I don't want to eat zebras, I want to eat plants. It's better for my cholesterol. The lion can't make that determination. The lion is completely meshubed. He's completely enslaved to the nature that he was created with. What makes us uniquely human amongst many things, but one of those things is that we have the capacity to completely transcend our nature. And that is our goal, to transcend our animalistic side and be in tune with that which makes us uniquely human, our godly side, our capacity to transcend the negative traits of our nature and refine ourselves and make ourselves better human beings. This is the goal between Pesach and Shavuos. So last week I spoke about the attribute of anger and what the source is and how we can resolve that and how we can overcome that. So this week I want to speak about something else, and that is something that is intrinsically related to Pesach, mystically, spiritually, and that is the power of speech and refining and rectifying our speech. And it's tangentially related to Parshas Emor as well, and this is brought by many Meforshim, that there's really sort of three sections of Parshas Emor. The first section deals with the laws of the Kohanim, but it is introduced with Emor el HaKohanim, speak to the Kohanim, with the word speech. The second segment of the Parsha deals with the Yomim Tovim. And of course, how do we sanctify our Yomim Tovim? How are we Makadish our Yomim Tovim? Through our speech, through Kiddush, through our Tefillas, etc. That's how we sanctify. That's how we make holy our Yomim Tovim, through our Koyach HaDibur. And then the end of the Parsha deals with the Megadeh, if the person cursed Hashem, and of course, utilizing his power of speech for something negative, for cursing. So and what happens to him, his negative outcome. So all three sort of segments of our Parsha deal with this idea of speech. And there's a reason for this. Parshas Emor is always read during Sefira HaOmer. And one of our Avedas during Sefira HaOmer is rectifying and refining our speech. And this is really, it says, according to the mystics, the Kabbalistic experts, the Galus Mitzrayim was also called, or also referred to as Galus Hadibur. That it wasn't just our physical bodies that were enslaved, that were in Galus, that were in exile, but our power to utilize our speech was also out of the intensity of the shibud, out of the intensity of the suffering, of the pain that we were going through in Mitzrayim. We were no longer even able to daven properly, even able to call out to Hashem. As it says throughout the story, that we were grunting from the Anchu B'nai Yisrael, that we were moaning and groaning, and the Yitzaku B'nai Yisrael, that we were crying. We couldn't speak any longer. We could just cry and grunt out of the pain, out of the terrible pain that we went through, that we were going through. So our speech was also in Galus. And that's one of the Kabbalists say the word Pesach is divided up into two words, Pesach, which literally means the mouth that speaks. This Pesach was about redeeming our capacity of speech. And therefore, every year, when we are commemorating and celebrating and reliving the story of Pesach and Sefira HaOmer and Shavuos, our Aveda every year should be this, to recapture, to take back our Koyach HaDibur, to utilize the power of speech that is uniquely human. And we're going to talk about this later on in the shiur, but communication is not necessarily uniquely human. Animals communicate with each other as well. But speech, the capacity of speech, and there's the capacity to utilize speech in a loving form, in a positive form, in a praising form, is uniquely human. And so to recapture that, to work on that, is absolutely our Aveda during this time of Pesach and Shavuos. So that's really what I want to talk about today, the importance of this and why we need to do this. Our speech is much more powerful than I think most of us actually realize or are in tune with. Because one thing that I have seen across the spectrum of Orthodox Jewry, religious Jewry in general, is that we are incredibly scrupulous with what goes into our mouths, right? We wouldn't dream of consuming something that has a questionable hechsher, right? Or eat something or go to a restaurant that the hechsher isn't proper. but we're not as careful with what comes out of our mouths. So that's what I want to talk about today. So I'm going to share the screen with you. I want to do the first piece. For those of you who are here in person, it's the Sichas Haran. I'm sharing the screen as well. Let's see here. Ooh, where's my toolbar? I don't see where my toolbar is here. Okay, so I don't know how to get my toolbar here. Oh, here it is, annotator. There it is. Okay. So here it is. So let me maybe make this a little bit bigger so those who are following online can see it even better. So this piece is called Sichas Haran. This is from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And this first piece, again, sort of connects the idea of speech and Pesach and why these two are interconnected. And he brings a fascinating custom, which I had never heard of before I learned this piece, that apparently in the times of Rabbi Nachman, that there was a custom, I guess in the time and the place of Rabbi Nachman, I had never heard of this custom, but there was a custom of turning over the table that you'd eat at, of turning over the table before Pesach. And if you look in the footnotes here, I'm not going to read the footnotes online, but if you look in the footnotes, he says that the reason for this on a very simple level was that they would kosher the table before Pesach, and then they would turn the table over so that the kosher part of the table wouldn't get any chametz on it, and they would eat on the sort of the underside of the table. And that was what they did, just sort of to protect the table from chametz. But this piece of Rabbi Nachman explains there's a spiritual component to turning over the table before Pesach. Fascinating little paragraph here, but just bear with me and let's learn together and let's see what he says. So he says, Hatichas hashulchan b'Shabbos hagadol. So I guess the Shabbos before Pesach, after they kosher the Pesach, after they kosher the table, the Shabbos before Pesach, they would turn the table over and eat from the underside of the table. So he says, but this turning over the table on Shabbos hagadol before Pesach, says the Reb Nachman of Breslov, this actually has a spiritual component to it and a purpose and a reason and a meaning behind it. He says the table is intrinsically connected to speech. Why? Let's take a look. He says Maram is the turning over the table alludes to because we have not experienced yet Yetzias Mitzrayim. We haven't experienced redemption yet. So our power of speech is still in exile, is still in Golus. Ada Pesach, until Pesach comes, Sha'oz Yotza HaDibur Ma'Golus. That when Pesach comes, when we experience physical redemption, when we are physically redeemed from Pesach, from Mitzrayim, through the Pesach experience, we are also going through a redemption of our speech. We are taking back our power to speak. Bechinas, and that's what we mentioned before, Pesach, the mouth that speaks. That Pesach is literally divided up into those two words, Pesach, the mouth that speaks. This is what is being redeemed. Our power of speech is intrinsically connected to this, to experiencing Pesach, experiencing redemption. He says, Ki yedu, as it's known, that according to the mystics, this was the main point of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Sheyatza hadibur mahagalus, taking back our capacity to daven to Hashem, to utilize our power of speech for something positive. V'hashulchan, he says, so what is this? How is this connected to the table and overturning the table? So he says, fascinating. Hashulchan hu bechinas hadibur. He says the shulchan, the table, is connected to speech. How do we see this? So he brings a pasuk from Yecheskel HaNavi, that when Yecheskel was shown a vision of the Beis HaMikdash, it says, "V'bechinas v'yedaber alai," that Hashem spoke to me, and Hashem showed me, and He said, "Zeh hashulchan asher lifnei Hashem." He showed him a picture of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or a vision of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and he said, "This is the shulchan that is placed in the Kodesh section of the Beis HaMikdash." But the pasuk could be read differently, says Reb Nachman. V'yedaber alai, v'yedaber, the dibur, zeh hashulchan, that is the table. Asher lifnei Hashem, that your speech, v'yedaber, your speech, is the table that could be placed lifnei Hashem. And the reason why speech is connected to the table is, he says, v'yedaber alai dafka. He says, v'yedaber, the speech is the table. Why? What's the connection to speech and the table? He says, Ki ikar haparnasa v'hachila. Because the food on the table is what goes into your mouth. The food on the table is brought about through your parnasa, through your earnings. And all of that is what goes into your mouth. And then the speech is what comes out of your mouth. He says these two, what goes into your mouth and what comes out of your mouth, are intrinsically related. So he says that which we take from the table, that which we put into our mouths, is very much, we get that, we're blessed with that by the power of our speech. He says, so the parnasa and achila, the food that we put on the table, shehu bechinas hashulchan, the food represents the table. The food's what we put on the table. Where do we get that food? Hu misham. It is from here, bechinas hadibur. When our speech is positive, we are blessed with parnasa. We are blessed with physical blessings from Hashem as well. So the food that we get, that food that we put into our mouth, comes to us from the power of speech. So the table represents my power of speech. The blessings on the table are directly related to my power of speech. And again, it's all related to our mouths. He says, because when we can look at, and this is very connected to the last week's shiur as well. Again, each one of us has sort of this dual consciousness. We have our animalistic soul, our animalistic consciousness, and that consciousness is very bound to the physical world. And then we have our godly soul, which is bound to the spiritual. The more and our job in life is, we are physical beings with physical perceptions, but instead of being meshubed and bound by the physical, we're meant to refine ourselves, to elevate ourselves. This was connected to last week's shiur as well, and connected to anger. When we remove ourselves from being bound by the physical, again, we're meant to live in the physical. We're meant to even enjoy the physical, but at the same time, having the mindset of a spiritual purpose, that we aren't simply here to immerse ourselves in physical pleasure, but we're meant to utilize the physical and utilize that pleasure for spiritual purposes. What is our mindset in the world? Are we simply physical beings amassing physical pleasure? For many of us, that's what we are. You know, the Chidushei Arim, the Ger Rebbe, says in last week's Parsha, such a beautiful idea. It says in last week's Parsha, in Achri Meis, it says about the mitzvahs, v'chai b'hem, right? You're meant to live with the mitzvahs. And the simple pshat is that the mitzvahs are meant, v'chai b'hem, that we're meant to live. So if, God forbid, somebody's life is in danger and they have to transgress a mitzvah in order to save a life, the Torah says, v'chai b'hem, we're meant to live with the mitzvahs, not die by them. So we're meant to transgress the mitzvah. If I have to transgress Shabbos in order to save a life, if I have to eat not kosher in order to save a life, v'chai b'hem, I am meant to do that. But says the Ger Rebbe, there's a different meaning. He says, every one of us, if we're honest with ourselves, we have to ask ourselves, what is our passion? What really excites us? What gets us excited to start the day? What makes us passionate? What are we truly living for? Let's be honest and ask ourselves. For some people, it's learning Torah. For some people, it's doing mitzvahs. For some people, it's a good steak and whiskey. For some people, it's the next business deal. For some people, it's shopping. For some people, it's amassing possessions. We all have our things that we live for, that really excite us, that really motivate us. And if we're honest with ourselves, ask yourself that question. What is your chayus? What is your life? What is your excitement? What is your passion? So says the Ger Rebbe, that's what the Achim is, the v'chai. Your chayus, your life has to be, or should be, behem, in the mitzvahs and ruchnias. The more that our life, the more that our passion, the more that our excitement is in something spiritual, is in something godly, whether it's Torah, whether it's mitzvahs, whether it's chesed, whether it's dedicating ourselves to improve the lives of others, or whatever it may be. That's connecting to something beyond ourselves. That's taking our physical beings and connecting to something spiritual. But for many of us, our answer is, our chayus, our passion, is very connected to physicality. The more the more our chayus and the more our passion is connected to physicality, the more difficult it will be to refine and to elevate. The more we're connected to something spiritual, something beyond our physical being, the easier it becomes to refine ourselves and make ourselves better and make the world better. And this is our Aveda in this world. We're physical beings with physical perceptions, but we're meant to rise above that, still living in the physical world, but with spiritual purpose and intent. And this is why he says, this is what he says in the next line. He says, so our brachas of achila, our brachas, the food that we put on the table, our parnasim, that which is on top of the table, is brought about in the bechinas hadibur. The brachas come from my power of speech. The more I utilize that speech for something spiritual, for something godly, for something positive, the more brachas are brought down into my life, the more I make a vessel for the brachas. But bechinas ki al kol meitzi piavai yichya adam. This is what the pasuk says. Lo yalechem levada yichya adam. Not on bread alone, not on the simple physicality are we meant to live. Ki al kol meitzi piavai yichya adam. Our yichya, our chayas, our passion needs to be al kol meitzi piavai, that which comes out of the mouth of Hashem, Torah and mitzvahs, godliness, spirituality. The more we're connected spiritually, the more refined the more we're able to refine ourselves. And then when we take back our power of speech, when we utilize it for godliness, for positivity, for love, for connection, then hashulchan hu bechinas dibur bechinas panim. Then our table is placed lifnei Hashem, before Hashem. Meaning before Hashem, meaning it has Hashem's ratzon. It has Hashem's desire. Our Hashem wants to bless that table. But bechinas v'yadaber alai, our dibur, zeh hashulchan asher lifnei Hashem. Our dibur causes zeh hashulchan, this table, to be lifnei Hashem, right before Hashem, the receiving of Hashem's blessings. Lifnei Hashem daikabu bechinas panim, right before Hashem, meaning receiving Hashem's blessings. So Al Kain, therefore, he says, this is the spiritual reason why on Shabbos Hagadol, which is before Pesach, our speech is still in exile. Sha'az who paid in Yitzias Mitzrayim, we're before the Yitzias Mitzrayim experience. Our speech is still in exile. We still haven't reclaimed our speech. Azai hu b'chinas hafizas hashulchan. To symbolize that, our table was turned over. Again, I don't know anyone who does this custom today, but apparently in the times of Reb Nachman, this was the custom. So this is why they would turn over the table. And then Pesach comes, and we put the table back upright. And we set the table lifnei Hashem. It's all symbolizing our power of speech. We are reclaiming, we are taking back our power of speech. So the overturned table, that our dibur was in Golus, our speech was in Golus in Mitzrayim. Until Pesach, until we're zeichet to experience the redemption, Yitzias Mitzrayim on Pesach, and then Pesach, we reclaim the mouth that speaks, we reclaim our speech. Okay, so we see from this, the Sikha of Reb Nachman, that the power of speech is intrinsically connected to Pesach. This is one of our Vedas during this time period, is to reclaim our speech. A few weeks ago, we had in Parshas Tazria Mitzora, where it speaks about the person who gets saras, right? And one of it says in the Gemara that there are many different sins from which saras comes. Now, saras we know is the skin disease that even though it manifested itself physically, but it wasn't a physical disease. It was a manifestation of a spiritual disease. And one of the sins that brought about saras was the sin of lashon hara, that when somebody would speak negatively about another human being, when that would happen, that person would experience this outbreak of saras. In a very real way, as the commentaries say, it was a warning to everybody else to stay away from that person. That person is a baal lashon hara, and that person has to go chutz lamachana. So obviously, the person who is speaking saras, speaking lashon hara and getting this saras, is obviously not on a very lofty spiritual madrega, because they're getting it because they're speaking negatively. I want to share with you, look at the second piece, the other piece that I brought. I just want to do the very beginning of it. I'm going to share it online here, those of you who are on Zoom. And this is a piece, well, let me make this a little bit smaller. This is a, whoops, hold on. I don't know. Second, let me just make this piece a little bit smaller. There we go. Okay. So, okay. So this is a piece from, it's called Epirion. This is from, everybody knows this author by another Sefer that he wrote. That's the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. This is Shlomo Gansfried, who wrote the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. But he asks a very good question in Parshas Tazria. Look at on the bottom left hand, on the bottom right hand side. Adam ki ba'or b'sarai. It says in the pasuk in Parshas Tazria that when a person has on his skin this tsaras. So he says, and I just want to do his question here, and then I want to tell you a story that will tie into this. Hiksha ha'alshech. He brings a question from the Alshech. The Alshech is one of the great commentators in the Torah, lived at the same time as the Arizal and Yosef Karo, the Baal Shulchan Aruch. They all lived together in Sfas. You can imagine that shul. They all davened together in the same synagogue. The Alshech, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the one who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and the Arizal, all davened together in the same synagogue in Sfas. And the Alshech was the one who would give the drasha every Shabbos. We can understand what madrega the Alshech is on. So he quotes the Alshech, and the Alshech asks a very good question. He says, the person that gets tsaras, the Torah refers to him as Adam ki yeh ba'or b'sarai. When a person, but he uses the word Adam. He says, Amai karu Adam. Why is the Torah using the word Adam? Shohi ha'ma'ula ha'gadela. Adam is a reference to man at his loftiest spiritual state. Adam was called, the first man was called Adam because the word Adam is related to Domeh. He is similar to Hashem. He was created in the image of Hashem. So Adam means Adam ala Elyon. He was similar to Hashem. He was created in the image of Hashem. There's many words for man in Hebrew. Adam, Enosh, Ish, Gever. There's many words in Hebrew for mankind. Adam is utilized specifically referring to man at his highest spiritual level when he emulates his creator. So the question is here, we're talking about somebody who's not on their highest spiritual level. Somebody who gets saras is somebody who's on a lower spiritual level. He's speaking lashon hara. He's denigrating his fellow human beings with his power of speech. Why does the Torah use Adam ki yeh ba'or b'sarai? V'oid hikshin, another question the Alshech asks, Amai tolu hatahara dafka b'kohen. This is fascinating that when a person would get saras, only the Kohen would be able to pronounce it as saras and therefore render him tamei and render him having to go chutz l'machana. He has to go into isolation outside the camp of Bnei Yisrael. But it was only the Kohen who was able to do it. And the fascinating thing is that what if to know what the difference is between saras and a regular skin disease, you had to be a real Talmid Chacham. You had to really understand the laws of what saras was. What if the Kohen wasn't a Talmid Chacham? What if the Kohen shouldn't it be dependent upon someone who's a scholar, not a Kohen? And the halacha is if the Kohen is not a Talmid Chacham, then a Talmid Chacham has to come with the person and he has to tell the Kohen, say it's saras, and the Kohen has to say it's saras. It is not saras until the Kohen actually utters the words, even if the Kohen has no idea whether it's saras or not, and is totally dependent on the Talmid Chacham to tell him. So the answer to the question is, why does the Kohen have to be a part of this at all? Why is the person brought to the Kohen? So in order to answer these questions and why the Torah uses the word Adam by tsaras, I want to tell you a story. It's a true story, and it's actually quite famous, and probably everybody here has heard this story. This story began in 1911. And in 1911, there was a Jew named Mendel Bayless who was accused of murder in Russia. And what happened was a 13-year-old boy was found with multiple stabbings, multiple puncture wounds, a 13-year-old Russian boy. And it was determined that this was some kind of ritual murder. And they blamed this Jew, Mendel Bayless. This was a real blood libel in 1911. This wasn't in ancient times, 1911 in Tsarist Russia. And this Mendel Bayless was arrested, and he sat for 2 years in Tsarist prison awaiting his trial. For 2 years, he was alone in isolation in Tsarist prison. Now, this Mendel Bayless was completely framed for this murder, and the framing, in fact, was so obvious, and was such an obvious framing that the Russian detective who was assigned to the case, actually resigned because it was clear that Mendel Bayless was not guilty, and on his own time. This is just a parenthetical that I found it fascinating when I was researching the case. On his own time, this Russian detective was determined to find who the actual murderers were, and he actually found them. He actually found who the murderers were. But anyway, going back to our story, so this Mendel Bayless was framed, and for 2 years he sat in prison. And his trial was in 1913, right after Yom Kippur. In 1913, he was put on trial. And this trial wasn't just Mendel Bayless that was on trial. The Tsarist government was putting the entire Judaism on trial. And they were bringing, the whole Talmud was put on trial. And they were bringing quotes from the Talmud that Jews consider non-Jews to be subhuman, or at least on a different level of humanity than Jews are. And therefore, it would be okay to murder a non-Jew in order to utilize their blood, et cetera, et cetera. This was all part of the blood libel. And this trial ended up awakening Jews, and Jews from all over the world were tuning into this trial. Because again, it wasn't just a single Jew, it was the entire Judaism that was on trial, but Jews from all over, from Jews from France and from Italy and from Asia and from North America, from the United States and from Canada, were all, and politicians and even non-Jews from all over the world. This was such an obvious sort of framing of Mendel Bayless that even non-Jews all over the world were putting pressure on the Russian government because of this blood libel trial. So during this trial, they knew that the jury was made up of anti-Semites as well. I mean, like many of the trials in Tsarist and later on communist Russia, the trials themselves were show trials. But the defense understood that it's not just, they don't just have to defend this individual. But Mendel Bayless had all kinds of alibis. He is himself an interesting story. He grew up in a Hasidic home. He himself left Yiddishkeit. He was no longer religious. He was working on Shabbos. The murder took place on Shabbos. He was actually at work at the time of the murder. He had testimony that he was at work. It didn't matter. He didn't listen to any of that. He was put on trial, but they understood as well that that this was not just defending him, but defending Judaism. And so there was a whole rabbinic team that was assigned to the defense attorney, or that the defense attorney chose to help him in the defense. And the rabbinic team was led by Yaakov Mazza, who was the chief rabbi of Russia at that time. Interesting, he was the government-appointed rabbi, but he was doing his best to defend Mendel Bayless and defend the quotes in Judaism. But there was one quote that he had a difficult time with. And it turns out Rabbi Meir Shapiro, who would later go on to found the Daf Yomi, wrote to him because he knew this would be a question that would be asked at the trial, and he wrote to him what the question would be and what he should answer. And the question is a Gemara in Masechtas Yevamos, and the Gemara deals with a corpse, a dead body that's found under a roof. And it says, Adam ki yamas ba'oil, that when a person dies under an oil, under a roof, that renders everything in the house and everything under that roof tameh. And the Gemara says Adam. It says Adam. So the Gemara says, Atem kruyim Adam. You, Bnei Yisrael, are called Adam. Ein umas ha'elam nikrayim Adam. The umas ha'elam are not called Adam. That's the quote. So meaning to say that when the Torah says Adam, that the person's body conveys Tumah, it's only the body of a Jew that conveys Tumah, not the body of a non-Jew. But the simple translation of that Talmud is that you, the Jewish people, are called man. Ein umas ha'elam nikrayim Adam. The umas ha'elam are not called man. So they knew that this quote would be brought. And how would they answer this quote? How do we answer that quote? How do we understand that? And so Yaakov Mazda had a difficult time with that quote. How is he going to defend it? And the answer was given to him by Rabbi Meir Shapiro. And Rabbi Meir Shapiro told him as follows: What does that Talmud mean? He says that Talmud has nothing to do with inferiority or superiority, that Jews are superior, therefore that is not what the Talmud is saying. He says, Atem kruyim Adam, that you, Bnei Yisrael, are called Adam. is because Adam refers to a unique quality that the Jewish people have that no other nation shares. A unique quality. That's all it's referring to. And what is that quality? He says that quality can be actually shown by the trial itself. He says that quality is Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lezeh, that the Jewish people are unique in the sense that none of us are an individual, that every one of us are interconnected and bound with every other one of us. He says, take a look at the trial itself. He says the fact that one Jew is put on trial, and you have Jews all over the globe who have never met Mendel Bayless, don't even know who he is, are not related to him, and yet every Jew all over the globe are davening for him, are praying for him, are writing letters for him. Every Jew feels that they themselves are on trial. He says, imagine an Italian or a Frenchman was put on trial. He said, would Italians all over the world be davening for him, would be praying for him, would be present? No. Maybe people in his village, in his town, if that. Because every person is their own unique individual, their own unique being. He says there is a specific quality amongst the Jewish people. That one Jew represents all of us. We are all bound and all interconnected. And that's why he says, look at the trial itself. Look at the perspective of the government. They're not just trying this Jew. They're trying the Talmud. They're trying the entire Judaism. They're trying every Jew because they themselves recognize that every Jew is bound and interconnected. And that is why every word in Hebrew has a plural form. Ish, Ishim, Enosh, Anashim, Gever, Gevarim. There's one word that has no plural. Adam. Adam has no plural at all. Adam can only be referred to in the singular. And that's why the Gemara says, Atem Kruyim Adam. Only Klal Yisrael can be called Adam. Only Klal Yisrael has this unique, has nothing to do with being superior, being inferior, has nothing to do with any of that. It has nothing to do with we are called man. No. That which is represented by the word Adam, meaning it is only singular, there is no plural, that is Bnei Yisrael. We are all one singular entity. And that is why Adam is not in the plural, and that's what the Gemara is referring to. And that was a turning point in the case. That showed that every other Talmudic piece that they brought was taken out of context. And Rabbi Mazel was able to show how every other piece was in fact taken out of context. And between that answer and between all of the alibis that Mendel Bayless had, even the foregone conclusion, even the fixed trial, the show trial, the anti-Semitic jury decided he was innocent and he was let go. But that answer by Reb Meir Shapiro, that answer also, let's go back to our piece from Empyrean, that answers our question when it comes to tsaras. Why does it use the word Adam when it comes to the person that has tsaras? And let's go back to our piece now. So we're at the very bottom of that piece. The near Lefia Niastaiti, 4 lines up from the bottom, on the right-hand side. 3 lines up. We know that a person gets tsaras from Lashon Hara. He says amongst the non-Jews there are Bali Lashon Hara as well. But they don't get tsaras. Why is it? Why is it only the Jews would get tsaras, but a non-Jew who speaks Lashon Hara does not get tsaras? The Nira Pasha, he says the answer is simple. Because by the Ummah Sa'elim, by the nations of the world, every person is their own unique individual. There is not an obligation of achdus, of oneness. There is no obligation that they have to come together as one entity because they are all separate entities. And therefore, when there's division, when there's Lashon Hara, it doesn't damage the Ummah Sa'elim spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, as much as it does to the Jewish people, because they are not unified to begin with. They're not one essential organic being to begin with. Masha'ain came Yisrael, But this is not the case when it comes to the Jewish people. Asher nishmaisenu chelek elokami mal. Our neshamas are all rooted in the same place, right? Our bodies are all different and all divided, but our souls are all rooted in exactly the same place. Our souls are all carved out from exactly the same place. And therefore, if we make our spiritual primary, if we make our spiritual side, our soul side, our primary focus in life, our priority in life, if we see life through spiritual lenses, we feel that we are all interconnected as one, and therefore we have a obligation, a halachic obligation of achdus, of unity, of oneness, because we are essentially one organic being, divided up into millions of different bodies. But our job is to reveal that oneness in the way that we behave, in our love for one another, in our connection with one another, in our bond for one another. One of the ways that we do this primarily is through speech. He says, so we are one, whether it comes to spiritual or physicality. We are meant to act as one organic being. Doesn't mean we all have to have the same opinion. It doesn't mean we all have to think alike and act alike and dress alike, but we have to have love and bond and connection together, like one family. You have different siblings in the family. Some siblings may be more religious, some siblings may be less religious, some siblings may dress this way, some may that way, but they all love each other as one family. That is what we are meant to do. So the Al-Shlach answers the question. So the Al-Shlach explains, when we get saras is not something physical. It's not something that comes just out of nature, out of physicality. It comes because of a spiritual lack. Then the Meforshim explain that with the reason why it says we are called Adam, the Ein Umas Ha'elam Kriyim Adam, and the Umas Ha'elam are not called Adam. This is exactly what Rabbi Meir Shapiro said. The other names for mankind, Ish, Enosh, Gever, they come in a plural form. Ishim, Anashim, Gevarim. There's a plural form. Masha Ein Kain Shem Adam, but the name Adam, Einu Ba Beribui, has no plural at all. It is a singular organic being. V'zeh meira achdus v'hashalom. Adam refers to a nation that is ultimately one organic being. That is Klal Yisrael. That's what it means. Zehu atem kriyim Adam. That's what it means. We are called Adam. And now we can understand, he says, and this gets back to now the whole topic of the shiur. This is why when it comes to the person that has saras, it says Adam kiyib or basari, the Shema Ma'ula, the name that symbolizes the unity, the name that symbolizes the highest spiritual level and the unity and the shlemas. When the person gets saras, why does he use that word? It's teaching us, since you are called Adam, it is most appropriate and fitting, and in fact obligatory, that we come together as one. When you speak negatively about someone, when you are utilizing your power of speech to denigrate, or your power of speech for negativity, you're not just affecting you. You're not just affecting that person. You're affecting the Adam, the Adam of the Jewish people, the shlemus, the oneness, the wholeness of Klal Yisrael. You're denigrating the epitome of our existence, the oneness of the nation that we are. Therefore, if a person speaks lashon hara, and you cause division and infighting amongst the Jewish people, if you denigrate the Adam through your speech, if you denigrate the wholeness and the shlemus of the Jewish people, then you'll break out in saras. Why will you break out in saras? Because you haven't just damaged the individual, you've damaged our entire nation. You've damaged the wholeness of all of us. That's why the person has to be brought specifically to the Kohen. The Kohen, it says the souls of Kohanim come from the celestial realm of Av, of Chesed, of love. Kohanim have an intrinsic love for Klal Yisrael. That's why if you ever listen to the bracha that the Kohanim say before Birchas Kohanim, what do they say? Levarich es Amo Yisrael ba'ahav. The Kohanim represent Av. That's why the rectification for the person who would denigrate another human being, another Jew, a person who would destroy the Adam of the Jewish people, is brought specifically to the Kohen. But even if the Kohen he can't even tell if it's Saras and needs a Talmid Chacham to explain it to him, but that person needs the influence of the Kohen's neshama. And this is what he says. What's the takana for somebody who spoke Lashon Hara? Behuva el Aaron HaKohen. He's brought to Aaron HaKohen. Shehem midas hashalom. Aaron HaKohen is shalom, is peace, is love. Lilmoit, so that the person will be influenced midracha, from the path of the Kohen, the Yechaper love, and he'll atone for that negativity of his speech. This is the power of our speech. And I saw just a beautiful idea from Rabbi Lawrence Kellerman. Many people are fans of him here in this year, who listen to this year. And I saw a beautiful idea from him. And he says, when man was created, it says, V'yipach ba'apav nishmas chaim, that Hashem exhaled. Man was created in a different way than everything else. Everything else was created through Dibur. Hashem spoke and it was brought into being. But the soul of man was created through Hashem exhaling into man. It says, V'yipach ba'apav nishmas chaim. He exhaled into man his soul. And it says, V'yiyah ha'adam l'nefesh chaya. And there was to man a nefesh chaya, a living soul. And the Targum, who translates the Torah in Aramaic, who translates just a simple pshat. The Targum translates, what does it mean, lenefesh chaya, a living soul? A ruach malala, a speaking soul. That what made man unique? Man was unique. His soul was created unique. His soul was exhaled. And how did that uniqueness manifest itself? Ruach malala, says the Targum, that man was given the ability to speak. But says Rabbi Kelman, that's how everyone translates ruach malala. He says, but that's actually not the exact translation. If you take a look in Parshas Vayera, after Sarah gives birth to Yitzchak, and Sarah praises Hashem, and Sarah says, who said to Avram? She was so filled with joy on the birth of her son. She said, who said to Avram that Sarah would give birth? Who said to Avram that Sarah would nurse a child? It was Hashem. She was praising Hashem. But if you look at the word in Hebrew, it says, mi milel la'Avram. It doesn't say mi daber el Avram. Mi omar el Avram. It says mi milel el Avram. Who spoke to Avram? But she uses the word milel. And Rashi says, why that word? If you look at Rashi on that pasuk, for those who want to check it inside, it's Bereshis Perek Chaf Aleph pasuk Zion, Bereshis 21:7. And Rashi says, milel is lashon shvach v'chashivus. It's lashon of praise. It's lashon of connection. Sarah was praising Hashem. When man was created, ruach mamala, with a speaking soul, it wasn't that man was uniquely given the capacity to communicate. As we said earlier on in the shiur, animals have the capacity to communicate as well. Animals can communicate, but their communication is relegated to the realm of function. There's a predator over here. There's a food source over there. There's water over there. Animals are able to communicate that to each other. So language isn't unique to man. What's unique to man is the ruach malala, is the capacity to use language to praise, the capacity to use language to love, the capacity to use language to connect. So when we talk about refining our speech during this period, taking back our speech during this period, what is it that we're actually meant to be working on? We're meant to be working on utilizing the unique capacity that was given to man for our speech to be utilized only in the positive, for our speech to be utilized as loving, for our speech to be utilized as connecting, for our speech to be utilized as praising others. When we do that, then we elevate our speech to the realm that is uniquely human. And again, from Pesach to Shavuos, we're going from the Korban Omer, which is the barley, which is the animal, being motivated by our animal consciousness until we get to Shavuos, where we're eating the shtei alechem, which is wheat, which is that which is uniquely human. We're meant to take that which is animalistic, the animalistic side of ourselves, and elevate it to the realm of that which is uniquely human. This is specified specifically by our koyach hadibur, by our power of speech. When I reclaim, when I refine my speech, I am utilizing it solely for positivity, for connection, for love, for praise. When I utilize my speech to denigrate another person, I am taking my speech, I'm causing it to descend to the realm of the animal, even below the animal, because the animals don't use their speech to denigrate, don't use their speech for negativity. They only use their speech for function. So if I only use my speech for functionality, that's at the level of the animal. If I use my speech for negativity, that's even lower than the behemoths. But when I utilize my speech, when I elevate my speech, and I utilize the unique gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me, to utilize my koyach hadibur, my power of speech for praise, for love, for connection, I have totally and completely refined that the capacity of speech, my power of speech. That is the Aveda of Sefira Omer. And that's Parshas Emor, which all three parts are connected to speech, reminds us of that in the middle of the Omer. This is our Aveda. And Emir Tzashem, if we utilize our koyach hadibur for speech, our table is turned over. Are the barachas come to us through parnasa, through that which we put on top of our table, through utilizing our koyach hadibur for love, for connection, for to praise others. So let's every one of us utilize this time. Let's not just count the days. Let's not just live through the Omer. Let's actually live Sefira Omer. And the first question we have to ask ourselves is, like the Ger Rebbe said, what is our chayes? What is our chai behem? And if our chai behem is simply physicality, let's transform that during this time period. Let's live a little bit deeper lives. Let's live a little bit more loving lives. Let's live a little bit more meaningful lives. Let's live lives where the gifts that Hashem gave me is utilized to uplift the people around me and the world around me. And when we do that, we will be zeicha to not be the same people that we were a few weeks ago on Pesach, to be all new, brand new neshamas, ready to receive the Torah, ready for Kabbalah Sotera on Shavuos. And this is why the preface, and I'll just end on this note, the preface to Shavuos, the coming to Har Sinai, was Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar. It says that Yisrael encamped there, but it says Vayichan Lashon Yachid, because when they got to Har Sinai, they were Ki'ish Echad Belev Echad. They were like one person. That's why it doesn't say V'yichanu, they camped. It says he camped, because they were like one person. That all of the bickering and all of the quarreling and all of the fights that they had throughout the Midbar, when they got to Har Sinai, all of that ended. They had uplifted themselves and refined themselves beyond their petty quarrels and bickering, which is a manifestation of our bodily consciousness. And they were able to connect themselves to their soul consciousness. And at the soul level, we are all united and one. When I can live with that soul consciousness, I am ready for Kabbalah Satorah. The way that manifests itself is primarily through the way that I speak to others, and the way that I speak about others. So Amir Tzashem, we will all be zeicha to Kabbalah Satorah, b'simcha, b'pnimius, b'terech hadashim, iti teitze, with the coming Mashiach Tzidkenu, b'imheir v'imenu, amen. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Hopefully we will all capture and bring our speech out of Galus. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Simon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Take care.
have a great day.
Week.
Life changing.